And once again, the internet has proven to us that it is great at putting people together. And that much has been obvious so far. We have talked about this before, and this also appears in the Hanging Out textbook. They talk about examples in their research, including the mobilization of kids to immigrant rights protests through MySpace, connecting with activist groups online, or helping out in school or community institutions as technical and media experts. For the most part, however, local community institutions and activity groups made little use of digital technologies and kids' media interest, and did not extend beyond the local given social networks. Few kids we spoke to were interested or involved in traditional politics, even though they might be highly energized by their local politicking among peers on social network sites and in other online groups and games. So it turns out that the internet, by putting all these connections between people, is allowing more people to be involved, but still very much in the short term. In the short term of what is currently probably the more pressing need or the most in demand cause that people are requiring. And certainly this is easy to see how, according to the trends or the news or the current political leaders, there are people who are going to be a little bit more engaged, a little bit more vocal about certain issues. But it is not yet a matter of politics in the sense that it is not helping governance as a whole. It is helping solve specific problems. Something else that exists in the textbook, in the Hanging Out textbook, is the hierarchies as they are mentioning the effect that the internet has over the existing hierarchies or new hierarchies. In all cases, players are engaging in a complex social organization that operates under different sets of hierarchies in politics than those that occupy them in the offline world. At the same time, the dispositions and social learnings that kids pick up in gaming are not completely cut out from their real life learning. Douglas Thomas and John Seeley Brown explored this dynamic in their discussion of why virtual worlds can matter. This is an article that is posted somewhere on Perusal. This suggests the notion of conceptual blending, in which players blend their understandings of online and offline. And it seems to be much more that there is this blending of online and offline ways to communicate, and a blending perhaps of the crowds that are involved in this. And of course, the possibility of upsetting the existing hierarchy of finding a leader, for example, on the internet, a person that turns out to be more vocal or turns out to be maybe more apt as a figurehead of a certain movement, and that becomes a way to mobilize people around those issues. And in this context, of course, having the possibility of upsetting the social order is very much a matter of politics, but again, it needs to be a sustainable effort. If it is around a specific issue, this is, again, just a matter of solving one problem. And people who have thought about the internet and about social science in general have observed as much in the terms of people who may be organized through some very specific ideas, but they may not want to organize any further than this. This is something that is conceptualized at what is sometimes, actually most of the time, called actor network theory, although it's not a theory in any kind of way. So that's not the right term for it, but that's usually how you meet that term. So the actor network is most important here. In order to trace an actor network, what we have to do is add to the many traces left by the social fluid through which the traces are rendered again present, provided something happens in it. So people are not just people, they are actors, and they are actors connected to a network, and that network causes what they call here, or what Latour, Bruno Latour, French philosopher, calls a social fluid. And you can trace the relationships between people through these social fluids, and that is probably the better way to start to look at these connections that are happening over the internet, because the social fluid can dry up and those networks can disappear very quickly, just as quickly as they showed up. In an actor network, account the relative proportion of mediators to intermediaries is increased. I will call such a description a risky account. meaning that it can easily fail. It does fail most of the time, since it can put aside neither the complete artificiality of the enterprise nor its claim to accuracy or truthfulness. As to its relevance for the actors themselves and the political impact it might have, this is even less automatic, as we shall see in the conclusion. The whole question is to whether the event of the social can be extended all the way to the event of the reading through the medium of the text. This is the price to pay for objectivity, or rather the objectfulness to be achieved. So the actor network so-called theory, is a way to look at how people are connecting through these networks, which can be a variety of ways and can be a variety of media, of course. And Latour, no, this is not just a matter to explain it, because that the explanation itself is sometimes pretty self-evident, but most importantly is that once you have the ability to trace those networks, it is a lot easier to make sense out of where those networks are coming from and perhaps where they are going after that. So it's not so much a theory, it's more of a method, a way to look at the way that people are organizing, and perhaps organizing on a more or less sustainable manner, as he points out here, because there is a reasonably artificial motive behind it, whether it is the current impetus or maybe just the internet itself. The resulting action, political action that comes from it, is not so much relevant as a result of that. So the goal here is not just to fill in the void of people that exist, but really to trace how those connections are working. And the way that Latour had previously pointed out is this system here, however crude of a drawing it might be, put to simply actor theory or actor network theory, is a change of metaphors to describe essences. Instead of surfaces, one gets filaments or rhizomes in Deleuze. Deleuze is another French philosopher. But you get the idea here, that instead of trying to see a group that is supposed to be a flat, maybe circle of some sort, it is more a matter of tracing the links between people. And somebody pointed it out in the in the reading, of course, that if you have a social movement that is coming together around an idea, and then you have a social network that is helping this happen, then what comes first? Do people find the social issue, then coalesce over it, or does the social issue happen and then people are coalesced around it? It is kind of difficult to catalog exactly what is a social network or a social relationship or just a social movement as a whole. Now, all this to lead to the way that we as people tend to think of ourselves as groups, whether they are social or political groups, or sometimes what you would call societies. And as far as anthropology is concerned, we have a whole lot of catalog of terms to talk about societies. We have bands and tribes and chiefdoms and confederations and federations and states and nation states. And those things are ways that we typically consider our social groups to work. But again, what is keeping those groups together? Typically speaking, when we think of bands, we have a lot of a family situation, and in tribes and chiefdoms, there is a typically a religious or spiritual content to it, that you have a spirit guide of some sort. Could be an animal, could be a deity, could be something, an ancestor, could be some other way that people will have this relationship together that goes a little bit beyond what the family does. But once you get to the larger groups of people, and the more and more people get into these social groups, then it becomes much less clear how those people are connected. And eventually, when we're thinking of ourselves as being parts of nations or nation states, the only thing that really ties us together eventually is the idea itself of the nation state, is that you can have people who think completely differently, sometimes speak completely different languages, maybe you vote for completely different issues, yet they are tied together by this unique system of the nation state. So whether we think of our social groups as a social glue of some sort, a social tissue of some sort, having people who are following one another, maybe associating with one another, maybe being enrolled in one group or another, having something to do in common. And of course, when we're using this word societies here, it could be a way to do business. You know, you have a business associate, and those people have business together as a society. What holds them together is the business that they are doing. Is what is tying our societies together just the businesses? It's the long series of businesses around specific ideas, specific concepts, whatever, or is it the fact that we have a much larger social connection between all of us? And perhaps you could think of it even more abstractly in terms of animals. Animals have pods, flocks, chimpanzee troops, whatever. They have groups of animals that are coming together. Does this look like a political group? In other words, are they together because they require to be together? Are they together because they are looking to plan their future together? Or are they just spending their time together because that's just something that they do and it's comfortable? Maybe it's historically relevant or whatever it is. So seeing people as actors and actors that could be networked in some sense is a very different matter than seeing people as a political group or a political society or something else of the sort. And it leads us to the larger idea of why these political projects are being put together. This is from John Dewey, a local icon here in Vermont. He mentioned in 1927 a more serious objection is that expertness is most readily attained in specialized technical matters, matters of administration and execution, which postulate that general policies are already satisfactorily framed. It is assumed that the policies of the experts are in the main both wise and benevolent, that is, framed to conserve the genuine interests of society. The final obstacle in the way of any aristocratic rule is that in the absence of an articulate voice on the part of the masses, the best do not and cannot remain the best. The wise cease to be wise. It is impossible for highbrows to secure a monopoly of such knowledge as must be used for the regulation of common affairs. In the degree in which they become specialized class, they are shut off from knowledge of the needs which they are supposed to serve. That once you become a political enterprise of some sort and you are focused on the politics themselves, you stop focusing on the social. And of course, if you are socially organized, you do not think so much about the politics of it because your more pressing matter is your society, your group of people. If you are organized as a political group, your most important focus is the politics, and those two things are not necessarily meant together. And if Dewey can point that out in the 1920s, you can bet that as of the 2020s, we have to think of this also as a reality of our social groups here, that there are groups that you can organize that are focused on specific issues, but that once they organize around these groups, it seems like they are setting themselves aside from society as a whole, or perhaps you could see it as they are creating their own societies. In Dewey's case, this is an aristocracy. In our case, it is groups that are organized around a certain slogan, a certain name, a certain political party, whatever it is, a certain idea then of, more taxes, less taxes, whatever. This is something else that exists in the book and that some people have mentioned on the message board, the idea of slacktivism, people being just kind of involved in issues, but not, actively going into the issues as you would like them to be in politics. The results indicated that participants who stated their support for the environmental group on the internet were less willing to join subsequent offline collective actions and were less likely to sign the petition on behalf of their group. This demobilizing effect was mediated by a reduced sense of responsibility. Participants who took the low threshold online collective action believed more strongly that they contributed to the group's welfare and goal attainment, which is why they were less willing to remain engaged. So again, people are engaged by being engaged. People are engaged by signing the petition online, but it seems to be the maximum you can expect from a lot of people. And in a way, doing that gesture is kind of putting people out of their element already, and it is a lot to ask. But on top of that, asking from them to remain involved, to remain engaged in the issue means a whole lot more work that people are not necessarily ready to put in. They might be a supporter of the cause, they might be loyal to the cause. It doesn't mean that they want to be actually a leader of the cause. So putting together the ideas of the social group, all of the people that you associate with, means that you can have a lot of information about these people and you can keep reaching on to them in perhaps new ways, increasingly new ways or whatever. But if you just focus on the words themselves, on the ideas themselves, and you do not connect that to the social glue, the social fluid, the social tissue, then you just keep on repeating the words without connecting it to the world, to the society that people are living in. And it eventually becomes hollow. It becomes an empty container of people and ideas that just so happen to have worked out for a second. Now, if you think of it even more specifically, that your specific idea is a hashtag or your specific idea is a person, is, again, a political name of a party, it becomes especially difficult to think of how to have those people be politically committed to something bigger than that, because those ideas are so all-encompassing and so, obvious in a way that it is hard to think of it as anything more than this, anything further than this, and especially to think of it as in terms of a future plan at this point.